Chapter 6. 5 Hindrances. Most of you have heard of Mara. Some of you don't know his name, but you all know him. He's the tempter. He tempts us into that which is apparently pleasurable. Mara came around when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree on the verge of enlightenment. Obviously, Mara is not some fellow with red flames coming out of his ears trying to pull us into a hell realm. Mara is the temptation that sits in our own heart. If it's possible for the Buddha just before his enlightenment to be visited by Mara, have temptations arise in his own heart, what to say about us? The difference is that the Buddha knew that this was Mara, temptation. He knew, and we very often do not. We rationalize and justify. I've seen a sticker on the back of a car that said, "If it feels good, it must be right." A lot of things could feel good. Possibly even killing a person might feel good at the time of doing it. The temptations that sit in our hearts are our defilements, our underlying tendencies creating havoc again and again. Because we don't like to admit that there is something within us that needs purifying, we justify it in any way we can. Sometimes people say, "Well, I'm supposed to enjoy myself," or "This is the way I feel, so I must need it." The temptations in our heart are there practically all the time, and because we don't recognize them, we are often in a quandary. We are being pulled this way and that. For instance, right now, we know it's better to hear Dhamma, but wouldn't it also be nice to go to sleep? If we were left alone, without a lot of people sitting here, it is quite likely we'd wander off to bed. Mara is there all the time. He is constantly trying to make us do what's most comfortable and creates more sense pleasures, without admitting that no real pleasure can ever come through the senses because it doesn't last. The Buddha said that there are 5 mental states that are everybody's enemies, the 5 hindrances. We all have them. We are all tempted by them. The first 2 are the worst, with the heaviest consequences. Sensual desire. The very first enemy is called sensual desire. It's a difficult one to recognize because it's highly approved of in society. Every advertisement, television commercial, department store, and shop window is geared toward arousing sensual desire. Indeed, the more people are able to gratify sensual desires with bigger cars, newer houses, and more beautiful clothes, the more successful they are considered to be. Since the gratification of sensual desire brings momentary pleasure, it has the appearance of being something good. If it feels good, it must be right. It has that false glitter about it. Nobody blames anyone for trying to gratify their desires. We don't even know we are doing it. It's quite amazing to be so unaware of what one is doing. This is not the case with the second enemy, ill will, anger. It's the other way around. It's constantly being blamed. It doesn't bring any pleasurable sensations. Everybody tries to get rid of it. Sometimes, of course, we try to justify it. I had to get angry because he, she, or they acted in an objectionable way. But it is not approved of in society, and it doesn't create any pleasurable sensations, and therefore one doesn't have the mistaken notion that it is something good. Anger and ill will, dislike and resentment, rejection, fear, anxiety, none of these are pleasurable, and if one gets angry enough, it is deserving of blame. Sensual desire creates some pleasure when it is gratified. Yet it is as much an enemy as anger or ill will. They are 2 sides of the same coin. As much as there is one, that much will there be of the other. Sensual desire creates craving, which is frequently thwarted. Ordinary people can't get all of their sensual desires gratified. The more of them one has, the more one feels that they go unfulfilled. Then one gets angry that one can't get what one wants. Nobody can have what they want all the time. It's impossible. These are the two enemies that make difficulties for us in daily living, and they also make it very hard to meditate properly. If anybody has been wondering, I dare say some of you have, why concentration is so difficult to achieve, especially if you have just started to meditate, these are the reasons. Sensual desire is the one that says, I'd like to sit more comfortably. Sensual desire is the one that says, I'd like to go to sleep now. Sensual desire says, I'd really like to talk. I'd really like to have a walk outside. It's too hot. I'd like to have a cold shower. I'm hungry. I want something to eat. I'm thirsty. I must drink. I'm not feeling comfortable, so I can't meditate. That's sensual desire, and it has something to say most of the time. It will only stop talking when the meditation experience results in far greater pleasure than sensual gratification can provide, namely, the happiness and tranquility that come from concentration. Only then does sensual desire disappear for the time of meditation, not permanently by any means, but for that short period. Because we have our senses, because we are born with them, we want to feed them. Just as we want to feed the body, so we also want to feed the senses. We would become ill otherwise. Before the first astronauts were sent off, one of the training methods used in America was the sense deprivation chamber, where there was no gravity and hence no touch sensation. It was soundproof and there was nothing to see. Everything was gray. Food came through a tube and was tasteless. The astronauts being trained were to ring a bell when they had had enough. I believe that the longest anyone lasted was 8 hours. Food through the senses is necessary to us, and we are attached to it. That attachment gives us the illusion that this is the most important thing there is, that this is where our direction lies, seeing beautiful sights, hearing pleasing sounds, tasting good tastes, smelling good scents, having pleasant touch sensations, and thinking thoughts that please us. But that kind of direction in life, and every person who hasn't trained in Dhamma and meditation has it, cannot be successful. It's fool's gold. It glitters but has no value because it's so short-lived. Imagine you were to eat an extremely good meal that tasted excellent, and you were to say, "This is very good." Your friend would invite you then, "Well, if it's so good, please keep on eating. You can stay here and eat from now until tomorrow morning." What misery, mental and physical. The only way a meal can be enjoyable is if it lasts 20 or 25 minutes. On a very hot day, you like to take a cool shower. You're enjoying the shower, and so you say, "Oh, this is nice. Now I feel pleasant and cool." Then your friend says, "Well, in that case, why don't you stay in the shower for the next 5 or 6 hours? Utter misery, isn't it? Nobody would ever dream of that. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maximum. The same with every other sensual gratification. It's no longer a pleasure when it lasts too long. It becomes misery. Yet it's what the whole world is searching for. Momentary sensual gratification. People even get drunk looking for pleasure, which is obviously not a pleasurable sensation once they are drunk. All searches for happiness through the senses that people attempt are doomed to failure. The senses are nothing but physical manifestations, ears, eyes, nose, palate, body, that have a sense consciousness. There is nothing personal about them, nothing essentially wholesome or unwholesome. There's no good or bad karma being made through the senses. Bad karma is made in the mind when we want to keep and renew the sensual pleasure. Some people get their sense pleasures through activities such as getting drunk, or even hurting others, drugs, or sex. These are very gross sensual pleasures connected with unwholesomeness. Others can find sensual pleasure in watching wildflowers, sunsets, listening to beautiful music. These are also sensual pleasures, but far more refined. The misery arises from the fact that we want to own, keep, and experience the pleasure again and again. When people see beautiful flowers, the first thing they do is reach out and pluck them. Why not just leave them there for everyone to look at? No, I want to own that which is beautiful. The enjoyment of the senses becomes more refined when there's more purification in a person. The smallest thing can be enjoyed, but the danger lies in wanting it. This wanting, the craving, brings the unsatisfactoriness because the wanting can never be fully satisfied. We're always lagging behind. There's always something more beautiful to be seen, something more to be heard or touched. There's always something else. This creates much restlessness because we can never get total satisfaction. Because we are not fully satisfied inside ourselves, we think that the fault lies with the object. There must be something more wonderful to be found. People search the world. It's very easy these days to go around this little globe of ours. All one needs is an air ticket. People go here and there in search of more excitement, new scenery, new experiences. Collecting experiences has become a fad. This does not satisfy either, because the experiences don't last. No experience one has ever had is still here. All gone, all memory. Nothing can be collected. It might be more useful to collect stamps than experiences. At least the stamps can be looked at. Sensual desire was compared by the Buddha with being in debt. If you have a house and you owe money to the bank on that house, you have to go every month to pay off with interest. But in the case of the house, eventually it might be fully paid for. With sensual desire, there's no such thing as paying off the debt. Sensual desire arises again and again. It's never paid off. We get hungry again. We get thirsty again. We want to see and hear and taste and touch again and again. The Buddha also compared it to a traveler who has gone on his journey without any provisions. He gets very hungry and thirsty. He sees a village in the distance and gets quite joyful, thinking, "Oh, there's a village where I can get something to eat and drink." When he gets to the village, he finds it totally deserted, an empty village. So he has to go on to find another village, and again it's deserted. The hope and anticipation of the gratification of sensual desire is that which makes it pleasurable. Once it has been gratified, it's already finished and done with, and a new desire arises. The Buddha also compared sensual desire with a pond into which many colors have been thrown. The passion of one's desire shows up in the many different shades that cover up the luminosity of one's mind. This is our difficulty. Because we are beset with desire, we can no longer see that there could be something else much more important. We only see the desire, and we only see the possibility of its gratification. We cannot recognize ourselves anymore. The Buddha gave several antidotes for this. The most important antidote is, first of all, to understand that sensual desire is an enemy that wrecks our inner household, creates fear that we may not get what we want, and enmity toward those who are getting what we want. Envy, jealousy, states of mind that are so unpleasant yet cannot arise unless we want what another person has. It's the only way these feelings can arise. It's essential that one understands that this is the cause of our human problems. Wanting the pleasurable sensations, wanting the comfort, wanting the gratification, often not getting them, and never being able to keep them. Letting go of wanting means letting go of dissatisfaction. But it isn't possible to do that overnight, or just by talking or reading about it. It's a gradual process. The first step is to sit with an uncomfortable sensation, not wiggling and shifting around, not trying to get out of this discomfort by changing position. There is no wriggling out of suffering. Suffering cannot be eliminated in this way. The only way out of it is to let go of craving. One can't wriggle out of craving. One really has to let go of it. So wriggling around isn't going to get us out of pain or dissatisfaction. The comfort we lack in the sitting position gives us a wonderful opportunity to learn about our sensual desires. If we don't learn about them here, there is no other place we're going to learn about them. Nobody teaches these things, not in schools or universities. They're not taught in the home. There, everybody's trying to be as comfortable as possible. Here, we have a ready-made possibility of learning something about our craving, the cause of all grief. If you are sitting comfortably, there's nothing wrong. It's wonderful. But if you aren't, it's just as wonderful. You have a learning situation right here in your own legs or back, or wherever it may be. The desire for comfort and the wriggling around trying to get it is exactly what everybody is doing everywhere. People pay a lot of money for it. That's why people work overtime, go on journeys, search for entertainment, to wriggle out of discomfort. But it's a lost cause. Why identify yourself with a lost cause? Once you've wriggled out of one uncomfortable situation, isn't there another one arising within a short time? When one entertainment is finished, boredom may arise again. The right leg no longer hurts because you've moved it. Well, the left leg's bound to start. It's a lost cause. It's foolishness to identify oneself with a lost cause. It's much better to identify oneself with the Dhamma. The Dhamma has been proved to be right. Lord Buddha proved it, and all those who have become enlightened after him proved it. It's much better to identify oneself with that. When your stomach growls in the afternoon and the mind thinks, I wonder if it's really necessary not to eat in the afternoon, or the mind goes back to your own kitchen thinking of all the things you could be fixing there, that's sensual desire. If the mind objects strenuously, then sensual desire's got the better of you. But if you can look at the desire and smile at it and say, this is Mara in action, then you've seen Dhamma. It's no use listening to or reading stories about Mara. You have to know him as he operates. And he has no other place of operation except in every one of us. He's very happy there, having a marvelous time because we're always giving in to him. One of the things that the Buddha advocated as an antidote to sensual desire is moderation in eating. And this is one of the reasons for accepting that precept of not eating after 12 noon. Moderation in eating doesn't mean eating nothing. It's eating enough to keep the body healthy. But this is a sensual desire that is easily gratified and one that arises again and again. For some people, 4, 5, 6 times a day. If we are able to put a fence up against one of our desires, we are going to be able to put up a fence against some more. One fence can keep out many desires. So the one that's so easily gratified and arises so often is the one to start with. And that's what we're doing here. Moderation in eating. Another antidote that the Buddha advocated is not seeing the whole but only seeing its parts. Most of you will know or have heard about the 32 parts of the body, which are often recited. In this very body, from the soles of the feet up, from the crown of the head down, surrounded by skin, full of these various mean impurities, there are in this body hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, membranes, spleen, lungs, large gut, small gut, gorge, dung, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, skin grease, spittle, snot, oil of the joints, urine, and brain. If you feel strong desire for a person, instead of seeing the whole beautiful form of that person, remember that this human being is made up of many small parts, instead of becoming entranced with the outer shape, form, and color, which are only the gift wrapping. 32 parts of the body start out with hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, and skin. So instead of watching the beautiful form, maybe just see the teeth? There is a story about a monk who was obviously an arahant in the Buddha's time. A man and his wife had had a very bad quarrel, and the wife no longer wanted to remain with her husband. She dressed herself up in all her finery, her best clothes, and all her jewelry, because she wanted to take all that with her. Then she ran away. The husband took off after her but couldn't find her. She had a head start on him. As the man was running along the street, searching for his wife, he met the monk. He went up to him and asked whether he had seen a good-looking, dark-haired woman in a red sari, with lots of jewelry, earrings, and golden necklaces, who had come along the road in a hurry. The monk replied, "I haven't seen her, but I saw a set of teeth going by." For us, that would be rather difficult, but it illustrates what the Buddha meant. Don't see the whole, because people don't usually fall in love with a set of teeth. They don't get passionate about a set of teeth. When, for example, desire arises to have a beautiful new car that is enormously expensive, if one only sees the outer shape, form, and color, one may be tempted to get this wonderful new car and be in debt for the next 20 years. But if one realizes that this car is made up of a steering wheel, accelerator, air filter, motor, which has many screws and bolts in it, one might not be quite that passionately involved, either with the car that only functions because its bits and pieces function, or with the person who only functions because his or her parts function. A meditation practice for someone who has a great deal of problems with passionate desire is to look at those parts in him or herself. We're all made up out of the same 32 parts of the body. Nobody's any different. If we take the skin apart, we find the same thing in everyone. The one antidote that is the same for all 5 hindrances, our 5 enemies, is to have noble friends and noble conversation. To have the kind of friends with whom one discusses not gossip, not the weather, not politics, not other people, but the way of emancipation through Dhamma. Those kinds of friends are the important people in one's life. When Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and attendant, once said to the Buddha, "Sir, a good friend is half of the holy life," the Buddha said, "Do not say so, Ananda. A good friend is the whole of the holy life." There is nothing to take the place of a spiritual friend. This is the most important person in one's life, the kind of friend who helps one remember to be on the path. It is a matter of remembering. When we remember, we can do it. But most of the time we forget. The noble conversation we can have with such a person helps us again and again to look at ourselves and see that our problems come from craving, from wanting. We don't eat any poison. We don't want to fill our bodies with rubbish food. By the same token, we should not fill our minds with rubbish talk or even poisonous talk. The mind should always be filled with Dhamma talk, righteous talk, the talk that uplifts, the talk that helps, the talk that soothes, calms, and heals, that most of all helps us to see our way out of the problems that beset every human being. When we have the good fortune to have a noble friend with whom we can have noble conversation, then it is also our way of repaying that gift by being a noble friend to others. Noble friends are like a chain reaction. We don't only need to search for one. We can also be one. Ill will. We are constantly tempted to fall into the error of being involved with our enemies. Because they are inside us, it's difficult for us to know them. We must, first of all, try to bypass them and then keep on purifying ourselves so that they will eventually no longer be part of our nature. The spiritual path, the path of purification, of emancipation, of liberation, is a path where we change our inner nature. Unless we start doing that, we haven't entered the path. Everything else is external. Only that is internal. While externals can be pleasant, can give a feeling of satisfaction, they will not change our inner nature. It is that change alone that makes the difference between a worldling and a noble one. A worldling follows his or her inner nature just the way it is. A noble one changes it. The second of those hindrances, those defilements that create so much havoc within us and thereby also around us, is ill will or anger. It may be slight, it may be heavy. It may be actually pronounced or just sitting inside. When it is verbalized, there is a chance the other person will also get angry. Then we have family disagreements or arguments with the neighbors. We have strife between communities, and in the end we have war between countries or in the whole world. The whole thing starts in our own heart. Therefore, it is essential that we realize the world is not other people. Each one of us is the world, and unless we find peace within ourselves, we won't find it anywhere. It makes no difference whether somebody else is angry, upset, wrong, or egotistical. It doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is what we ourselves are doing about it. There is never going to be total peace in the world. In the Buddha's time, there wasn't total peace. In none of the great spiritual masters' time was there total peace. On the contrary, history tells us about political manipulations and warfare, brother fighting against brother. The only peace that we can experience is the one in our own heart. The peacefulness that the Buddha found for himself had enormous repercussions in the world, though. He was one man who made peace with himself and with the world, and that peace is still available to us today, 2,500 years later, in his words and instructions. 500 million people in the world call themselves Buddhists today. Obviously, our karma is not exactly the same, but it would be quite sufficient if the peace we found in our own heart could extend to our own family. Even that would be a great achievement, don't you think? That would be enough. If it extended to our whole family, every last member of it, then maybe it would extend to our neighbors also. An even greater achievement. We don't have to become a Buddha in order to have some wholesome influence over others. But wholesome influence can only be exerted when there is peace in our own heart, when anger no longer arises. The very tendency to irritation only disappears in arahants. But having a slight irritation in one's heart is a far cry from getting angry or having arguments, being resentful, rejecting others, feeling hurt, and thereby justifying resentment. Anger arises because one feels hurt in some manner or form. Pain has arisen, and the absurd human reaction, the natural instinctive one, is to inflict pain in return. Unless we become aware of that, we can't change it. Not everybody starts to inflict pain on others. Some inflict pain on themselves. They swallow their anger and suppress it, and it seethes inside. All that resentment, worry, and anger shows itself in physical ailments, lack of energy, depression, negative reactions, a lack of enjoyment, and happiness. Very few people walking along the streets have a happy expression on their face. Have you noticed? You don't have to be here to notice that. You can be in Sydney, in London, in Amsterdam, or Paris. It doesn't matter where, it's the same wherever you go. Very few people have a happy expression on their face, and equally few have a serene expression. The hurts that we have experienced in life, with our constant reactions to them, give us the idea that we can eliminate the pain if we reciprocate. On the contrary, this creates double pain. It is another one of those absurd human follies, just the same as thinking about the past and the future instead of living in this moment. The Buddha compared anger to a bilious disease. Exactly the same words for anger are used in the German language. Mir kommt die Galle hoch. The bile comes up. If you've ever had that happen to you because of illness, you know what it tastes like. If you've ever been angry, and I doubt if anyone is spared that, you also know what it feels like. It feels awful. Yet people get angry over and over again. If that's not absurd, what is? It's like hitting oneself again and again, every time feeling hurt, but still continuing. The Buddha also compared anger with picking up hot coals with one's bare hands and trying to throw them at the person with whom one is angry. Who gets burned first? The one who is angry, of course. He compared anger to a pond in which the water is turbulent. If you have roiling water, you can't have a clear and calm surface in which to see your likeness. When one is angry, it's impossible to know whether there is any purpose being served. Mindfulness is lost. One has forgotten all that, one is just angry. If anyone ever had time to look in a mirror when they were angry, they'd be surprised at the kind of face they would see. But nobody has time for that when they are angry. One is engulfed in the emotion. The Buddha said one of the first things to remember when anger arises is that I am the owner of my karma. Such recollections are extremely important to have at your command, to remember them at a moment when it's critical. I'm the owner of my karma, so when I'm getting angry, obviously I'm going to get the result of that. Whether or not the other person has done anything to justify your anger has nothing to do with it. There is the beautiful story of Kantavadin, the teacher of patience. Beautiful because it exemplifies so well the non-justifiability of anger. The king of Kausala was a very rich king. The story also says that he had 500 wives. We must remember that 500, 1,000, 1,500 in Pali always means many. So whether he had this exact number of wives or some approximate number, we don't know. One day the king decided he wanted to go on a picnic, so he let his wives know this. The cooks were alerted to prepare the food, the servants to get the elephants ready with seats and decorations, and the soldiers to get ready in their best uniforms. The next morning, the whole palace, the royal servants, and the royal wives set out. They came to the forest and found a beautiful meadow for their picnic. The king ate and drank too much. Immediately after lunch, he fell asleep, and the wives said to each other, "Now's our chance. We don't often get out of the palace. Let's look around." They all trooped off and looked at the butterflies, the greenery, and the trees, and enjoyed the beauty of the forest. Very soon they came to a little bark hut, in front of which sat a very famous old sage whom they recognized as Kantavadin. Kanta, patience, Vadin, teacher, teacher of patience. All the women sat down in front of him, paid their respects, and asked him to preach a sermon to them. He very willingly obliged and spoke about moral conduct, loving kindness, and generosity. Meanwhile, the king woke up, and there wasn't a single wife to be seen anywhere. He was furious. He called the soldiers and said, "Go, get my wives back immediately." They obediently ran off into the forest and found the wives sitting in front of Kantavadin's hut. They went back to the king and reported, "Your Majesty, they are sitting in front of Kantavadin's hut listening to a sermon." But the king was still under the influence of all that food and drink and couldn't listen to reason. He told the soldiers to chase all the wives back to the meadow and then tie Kantavadin to the nearest tree. Since they were in the employ of the king, they could not do otherwise. They chased all the wives back to the meadow and tied up Kantavadin. Then the king took a huge knife, ran up to Kantavadan in a great rage and said, "You old scoundrel, you! You've been trying to take my wives away from me." And he cut off one foot and said, "And where is your patience now?" Kantavadan replied, "Not in my foot, your majesty." Then the king proceeded to cut the old sage to pieces while repeating the same question and each time getting the same answer, which increased his fury. When Kantavadan was on the point of dying, the soldiers who had witnessed the spectacle said to Kantavadan, "Sir, please do not curse the whole kingdom, just curse the king." And Kantavadan said, "I do not curse anyone. May the king live long and happily." And then he died. The story says that the earth then swallowed up the king. The next day the Buddha was informed of this happening, whereupon he said, "Who does not act in this way has not understood my teaching." The beauty of the story lies in the fact that we have a guideline. We have an ideal. Even if we were cut up limb from limb, there is no reason to get angry. That goes a bit far for us, doesn't it? Obviously, Kantavadan was an arahant because his remark, "My patience is not in my foot," means that although he was experiencing excruciating physical pain, his mind was not affected, and that is only possible for an arahant. In our case, it's not possible. Our mind is much affected by our physical discomforts, but whatever happens to us, it is probably not going to be quite as bad as being cut up limb from limb, piece by piece. If we could remember this story and remember what the Buddha said, "Who does not act in this way has not understood my teaching," maybe we could see that the anger that we experience at anything or anyone is only a reaction of our own defilements. It has absolutely nothing to do with the deed or the doer itself. When we get an idea of that, we have a chance to change, but only if there is mindfulness and we become aware when anger arises. Mindfulness will act like the brakes on a car. If you have no brakes on a car, it's obviously going to be very dangerous. Without mindfulness, life is very dangerous. When you step on the brakes of mindfulness when anger arises, you become aware that there is a defilement. There is something unprofitable, unwholesome to work with. With this awareness, you already take away most of the anger's strength, just like putting on the brakes of a car. You can take away most of the speed and slow down. Understanding this as a defilement already slows the whole process down and can actually bring it to a standstill. As anger comes to a standstill, you can take a look at it and see its uselessness. You see the hurtfulness to yourself and the foolishness of making yourself unhappy. The greatest foolishness that people perpetrate is to make themselves unhappy because of their own reactions. A strong resolution is needed one day, maybe today, maybe next year, maybe next lifetime, to stop making ourselves unhappy, to no longer react negatively to whatever happens around us, because we realize that everybody is beset by defilements, and that whatever we experience that is not pleasing to us is due to a defilement. The whole world is full of defilements. Just look at the newspapers, the international magazines like Newsweek. What do you see? Nothing but defilements. If we accept the fact that the whole world is beset by them and made unhappy by them, why not take a step in the right direction and try to stop oneself from joining in this unwholesome chorus? Why not step aside from it and watch it from the sidelines? One can do that when one no longer gets involved with negative reactions, of which anger and hatred are the strongest. People will never stop saying or doing the wrong things. Only when we train ourselves in Dhamma will we have a chance to stop. But we can't help ourselves. If we are confronted by wrong things, wrong reactions, wrong deeds, selfishness, wanting more than we are willing to give, what does it matter? The only thing that matters is the peace and happiness in our own heart. Everything else becomes a totally unnecessary problem that people usually live with. All problems are created by our own reactions, and we have the natural tendency, another of our absurdities, to blame the trigger. We get angry, so we blame the person who has triggered the anger. We get sad, so we blame the person who has triggered the sadness. Or we may blame the event. But we forget that it's impossible for us to get angry or sad unless we already have that tendency inside us waiting to be triggered. It could never happen otherwise. The simile I like to use is the Jack-in-the-Box, a toy for children, a little box that has a doll inside sitting on a spring. The idea is for the child to touch the lid ever so faintly, then the little Jack jumps out. If we take the doll out of the box, the child can hit the box with a hammer and still no Jack will jump out. There is nothing inside. It doesn't matter what the trigger is. Only what's in there can come out. The only way we can find peace in our own hearts, find the pathway that leads to liberation, is by changing ourselves, not by changing the world. There's nothing to change out there. Everybody has to change him or herself. The Buddha did not deliberately change people. He told them how to do it for themselves. It's strictly a do-it-yourself job. Nobody can do it for you, and the sooner you start, the sooner you have a chance of finding happiness, totally independent of what goes on externally. Very few people in this world have perfect situations. Everybody has something wrong in his or her life. Either the house is too small, or the salary too low, or the relatives don't agree, or the street is too noisy, or the food is not good enough, or the education isn't sufficient for the job one wants. There is always something wrong. Nobody has a perfect situation. Everybody tries to make it as nice for him or herself as possible, which is all right. But if we do not take a stand now and keep waiting for perfect situations, we will never change. We can't wait for perfect situations because they'll never happen. The perfect situation can only be created inside one's own heart and mind. There it is possible. The Buddha said the human realm is the most perfect one for liberation. We have enough suffering, enough discomfort to spur us on to do something. And we have enough pleasure not to become totally depressed by our suffering, so we are still in a hopeful state of mind. The only thing that we're doing wrong is we're always hoping for the wrong things. We are always hoping that the situation is going to change, that whomever we love is going to love us too, that the people who are dear to us are going to remain with us, or we're hoping that we're going to be rich, if that's what we're looking for. Maybe we're hoping to be so intelligent and wise that we will never make a mistake. Always hoping for the wrong things. This hope in our heart can be put to great advantage. It comes about because we know there's something wrong and we're not totally depressed by it. We all know there's something wrong, but the only things wrong are the defilements. That's all. Nothing else is wrong. What we need to hope for is that we shall be able to do something about them right here and now, and not in the future, because the future is imagination. Who knows what might happen tomorrow? Nobody does. But we do know right now when one of the defilements arises. We do know when we get angry. That can be known, and only that which can be known can be worked with. That which can be utterly and completely known, that is our working ground. When we get angry about anything at all, the first step is to remember, I am the owner of my karma. The second step is not to condemn yourself. And the third, to change the reaction. The most unpleasant emotion we can experience is our anger toward other people. If we get angry at material objects, it is minor, not important, and not deeply rooted. Before letting the anger at a person become full-blown where there's no hope of changing it anymore, there is a possibility of substituting loving kindness. People often say quite rightly, "But I'm so angry. How can I have loving kindness for that person?" Some mental acrobatics have to take place, namely, realizing that anger is useless. It makes one unhappy. It makes others unhappy. Not only that, it also makes a groove in the mind so that anger arises more and more easily. That's why we often find old people are crotchety. Everything around them becomes disagreeable. They're never happy because the negative groove in the mind has become so set they can't get out of it anymore. Knowing these dangers, we look at the person we're angry with and try to remember something nice that person has said or done. That can be effective because if we know the person at all, we should be able to remember something pleasant. Everybody does something nice once in a while. Everybody has some goodness in them, so bring that to mind. If we are already too angry to think anything good of that person, then remember that only an unhappy person acts in a nasty way. A happy person acts and speaks in a happy way and won't make others angry. So obviously, that person you are so angry with is experiencing unhappiness. They're suffering. Have some compassion for the other person's suffering, whether they have a physical ailment or whether they're suffering from never having heard Dhamma. One doesn't know what may be the cause. It doesn't matter. Have compassion for that person. If we're already so angry and can't remember anything good about the person, can't think about their suffering, we can try to feel like a mother toward them. That person's mother surely loves him or her. If we have any understanding of the Buddha's words, as the loving-kindness discourse proclaims, we can remember that person's mother who certainly feels love toward her child and try to arouse a motherly feeling in ourselves. All these changes in the mind bring results. It will take a while to be successful every time, but by practicing continually, it becomes a habit, becomes second nature. And when it's second nature, one's original nature has changed. Anger, while still arising, no longer has significance or force because one has learned to change it. Who can arisen anger curb? Like holding back a chariot. Him a true charioteer I call, mere rein-holders are other folk. Dhammapada, verse 222. Anger need not always be a strong emotion. Anger can be resentment toward other people. It can be the rejection of certain groups of people who don't think or believe or speak as one does oneself. That's very common in the world. It can mean rejecting other people because they happen to have a different skin color or religion. Rejection of a group of people is the same as hatred. There may be resentment of one's own lack of material opportunities. Maybe we blame someone for that or resent our lack of opportunity for self-assertion because others get in the way. That too is anger, and it's usually suppressed. One doesn't even admit it to oneself, which has major repercussions unless the anger is changed into acceptance and to being at ease with oneself. Suppression creates inner turmoil, which makes it impossible to see anything clearly. One sees everything from the standpoint of that suppression, that resentment. The Buddha advocated loving-kindness meditation and loving-kindness conduct as the antidote for this. Meditation as such is all very well, but so often it degenerates into words only, and most of you have heard the words so many times. Some people take the words to heart, many people don't. This is the danger of words. This is the danger of externalizing. Often we have the mistaken idea that because we have said the words, because we know the words by heart, because we've chanted them or listened to them being chanted, we've actually done it. All that's happened is that one has created in oneself an inner expanse of devotion to be used for one's working ground. Devotion is love, but one hasn't changed oneself yet. The words are only a landmark, a street sign. They're pointing in a certain direction. The Buddha's words are nothing except pointers in the right direction. They don't do anything for anyone unless one changes one's heart and mind. You know that we can change our hearts and minds. It's even embedded in the language we use. We say innumerable times, "I've changed my mind. I'm not coming." We change our minds many times. Why not once more? Loving-kindness conduct is something that we can do deliberately, but it's only a device to help us change our heart and mind. It's not an end in itself, it's a means. The loving-kindness meditation and loving-kindness conduct are both means, devices, tools. They're not the end in themselves. The end is the change of heart. Loving-kindness conduct, we all know what that means. Looking after someone who is sick, inquiring after somebody's health, visiting them in hospital, giving them some food when they're incapacitated and can't look after themselves, being concerned about other people and trying to help them. The further one can reach with that help, the better, but one has to start within one's own family as a matter of course. Yet that's only a beginning. Looking after one's own family can just mean looking after the extension of one's self. There are many other opportunities for looking after people. That is loving-kindness conduct. Loving-kindness conduct should not be confined only to a small group. It should show itself everywhere. These are the antidotes that the Buddha gave to cure anger, plus noble friends and noble conversation, which give us health food for the mind. Sloth and torpor. I have told you about two of our enemies, but unfortunately we have three more. The first two, of course, you can also call greed and hate, and they are the major unwholesome ingredients of a human being. Not that we don't have non-greed and non-hate also. Non-greed is generosity and non-hate is loving-kindness. It is a matter of cultivating the positive and constantly dropping the negative. While it's only that, it may sound simple, but it's hard work, and unless one is willing to do the work, one cannot follow the Buddha's path. It's the kind of work one has to be willing to do without pause. It has nothing to do with sitting in meditation. This is a full-time job. If we sleep 5, 6, or 7 hours a day, that leaves us with something like 17 hours a day for the work. If we were to confine it to 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening of meditation, it would be impossible for us to make any headway. If we only try to follow the Buddha's way 2 hours a day and the rest of the time forget about it, this is not as uncommon as it may sound, it's not going to relieve our suffering. Our third enemy is called sloth and torpor, or lethargy and drowsiness. And isn't it an enemy of meditation? I dare say most of you have met him already. It's when the mind is not sleeping, but not awake either. There is a twilight zone, where no fruitful work of any kind is being done. As far as one's meditation practice is concerned, it's the same as being asleep, because when one is asleep, one has no way of concentrating. Nor can one concentrate when one is in the twilight zone. The only difference being that one can get out of the twilight zone a little more easily. It isn't quite as deep as sleep, but it has the unfortunate characteristic of returning over and over again, in and out, in and out. This kind of mental state in meditation has its equivalent in daily life, showing up as a lack of direction, which results in lack of energy. It's such a very common experience that a person with energy stands out as an exception. Yet, energy is one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So you can see how essential an ingredient it is for one's mental makeup. Energy arises when one has a clear-cut direction. One knows exactly where one is going and keeps at it. But when the mind has no clear concept of what it's actually trying to accomplish, other than staying alive physically, not much energy is produced. It's not fascinating or interesting, and the subconscious mind knows already that it's a lost cause. Nobody can survive. To use one's strength and direction just for survival is not a fruitful undertaking, and real energy will not arise. On the contrary, one feels bogged down and oppressed by it. The Buddha compared sloth and torpor with being in prison. When one is in prison in a little cell, there's nothing one can do until somebody opens the door. When the mind is beset by lethargy and drowsiness, lethargy is in the body and drowsiness is in the mind, it is imprisoned to the extent that one can only just rouse up enough energy to do the most necessary things. Most people don't know and don't accept that meditation is a necessity, and so the mind easily gives up. One has to be quite clear about the efficacy of meditation. It's not only necessary to eat, sleep, wash, and dress. These are automatic survival techniques that don't need a lot of energy. They are instinctive. But meditation needs energy, and that can only be aroused if one knows the importance of it, if the mind is quite clear that this is what one really must do. Sometimes we get so fascinated by a book we can stay up half the night and not get tired at all. We just sit there reading. Or we might go to a party and talk to others practically the whole night and not get tired because we're interested and delighted. Meditation has to fascinate one. Then there is no reason for the mind not to be alert. At the beginning of the practice, meditation is not delightful at all. It seems bothersome. It seems to be difficult. It has the ingredients of suffering. But when the mind has an understanding of what one is doing, namely watching each moment as it arises, it becomes fascinating to get to know one's own mind. What could be more fascinating? Talking to other people or just reading a book is only knowing about others. But if one watches one's own mind states arising and passing, that is the most fascinating thing one can do, and the most profitable. Once Moggallana went to the Buddha and told him that he had fallen asleep while meditating. What would the Buddha recommend? The Buddha told him that when he felt drowsiness arising, to open his eyes and look at the light, rub his cheeks, pull his earlobes, move his body to get the blood circulation going, and, if necessary, stand up. Anything was better than falling asleep. These are physical ways of overcoming drowsiness. But there are also ways to help the mind to look in the right direction, such as, life is uncertain, death is certain. Right now is the best opportunity for meditation. There are companions, there is guidance, there is food and shelter. The body is healthy and well enough. None of these things are guaranteed. They are results of excellent karma. This is a way of arousing the mind energy. Remember that there is no other moment except this one. The future may seem assured, but that's an illusion. People die every single moment. When we die, which we all will, and are reborn, which we all will be unless we become arahants, then we have to start all over again. We have to learn to walk, to talk, to eat, to go to the toilet, to dress ourselves. We have to go through the whole school system again, get married, have kids, see them get married. Now you've done it all this time. Let's use the time left for what is most important. We've done all the other things. We've already learned to walk and to talk, to dress and to go to the toilet. We've been through school. Many of us have had kids. Perhaps they've gotten married. Now is the time. There isn't any better time. If we arouse the energy in our mind for meditation in this way, The energy feeds on itself. It's like having switched on the light. Once it's switched on and the electricity supply is not stopped, the light just keeps on shining. Meditation does need a lot of energy. It's strange that one should need so much energy when sitting or walking slowly all day. The reason we need so much energy for this is that the mind is constantly trying to do something else, rather than be attentive, so the mind's energy is being used up. If the mind were not throwing up all sorts of ideas and hopes and wishes, there would be no tiredness at all. It doesn't come from that bit of physical action that we do here or any other day in our lives. Yet everybody's dead tired at night. It's the rummaging around in the mind and the constant judging. This I like and this I don't like. This one I'll have and this one I'll get rid of, which is so tiring. That's why people who do jobs involving only mental activity are as tired, or more so, than people who plant trees or build roads. When the mind has become concentrated and can stay still, it finally gets a rest. Until that happens, we have to arouse it again and again by telling ourselves not to give in. Giving in to our natural inclinations is what everybody else does. That's the instinctive way, giving in to the desire for comfort, giving in to having it as easy as possible. But the Buddha said, "The one who conquers 1,000 times 1,000 armies is as nothing compared to one who conquers him or herself." Conquering oneself means conquering one's natural inclinations and not letting the mind get away with them. The wish to meditate should have a good reason behind it, and only then will we arouse the energy to do it. It's not a good enough reason to want some pleasant experiences. That's not a compelling enough reason for meditating. And yet that is foremost in many people's minds. It's very likely to be a disappointment, because the pleasant experience isn't going to materialize very soon. The energy for meditation is lost then, because one doesn't get what one wants, and meditation becomes suffering like everything else, an unfortunate mind trap of wrong thinking. Meditation has one object only, namely to prepare the mind to get out of all suffering, to prepare it for liberation. It is a means to this end, and not for pleasant experiences. Those do happen, and why not? Let us be grateful for them, very grateful that they do happen and that they give us the impetus to continue. But when they don't happen, that doesn't matter either. The mind has to have meditation training in order to become liberated. The Buddha compared sloth and torpor with a pond where the mud has risen to the surface. If there is mud, of course, one can't see one's likeness. There is no clarity. In that twilight state of half sleep, half wakefulness, there is no real awareness. Even in daily living, when the mind says, "I've had enough, it's too strenuous, I don't want to do it, let other people do it. Why should I? Nobody else is doing it." It's a muddy mind, because one can't see a clear way, a clear direction for oneself. A clear direction brings the needed energy. One knows one's path and destination. One can walk toward it with vigor. When one has no destination, there's no fascination, no interest. It's difficult to find a clear destination in life. But the Buddha has shown us the way. He has a clear destination of freedom, of cessation of suffering, of liberation, of nibbana. Restlessness and worry. The next enemy is restlessness and worry, or distraction. Everybody suffers from that, so you can see what a common enemy it is. All 5 enemies are unfortunately very common. Everybody has them to some degree. We need to check which one is our own worst enemy, which of the 5 comes around most often. They are all sitting inside waiting for an opportunity, but 1 or 2 of them can appear at the slightest provocation and often overrun us. Those are the ones we need to work on. Restlessness in the mind shows itself in restlessness in the body. The body is the servant. It has no authority of its own. The body without a mind is a corpse. Whatever the body does is being dictated by the mind, whether we are aware of that or not. Most of the time we react so spontaneously and impetuously that we don't even know that the mind has said, "Do that," and we think, "Oh, it's my body." But it can't be my body without my mind. Restlessness in the mind is mostly due to past experiences, those one has committed and those one has omitted, all the things in one's life that one would have liked to do and didn't, or those one did and would have liked not to do. Restlessness in the mind makes it very difficult to concentrate because it arises again and again. The Buddha compared restlessness in the mind to a pond where there has been a lot of wind making the waves rise high. When there are waves in one's emotions, one is drowned by them. One can't see clearly. Worry is usually about the future, and most people are extremely good at worrying and often fail to stop and think how useless and absurd it is. Worrying about the future is meaningless. The person who's worrying is not the person who is going to experience the future. There will be change, not just having grown older and hopefully a bit wiser, but a totally different set of circumstances with different thoughts and different feelings. Quite useless to worry about the future. If you have some photos of yourself when you were 4 or 8 or 12 or 15, hold them up against the mirror. Look into the mirror and decide which one you are. Are you the 4-year-old, the 8-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 25-year-old, or the one who is looking into the mirror, or all of them? If you are all of them, then by now you must be thousands of different people. And that is what one really is, a state of constant change. If the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old had worried about what was going to happen to the 60-year-old, would that have made any sense? You can't remember what that 15-year-old was thinking or worrying about. The same goes for worrying about tomorrow. There's no sense in it. An entirely different person is going to experience it. That doesn't mean one can't plan. Planning and worrying are not the same thing. Planning turns into worrying when one starts thinking whether the plan is going to materialize. Planning is fine, and so is deciding to then drop the plan until one can actually put it into action, without being concerned with the future results. Worry besets most people and makes the mind tumultuous. It takes one away from the moment, which is the only one in which we can live. Moments spent in worrying are all lost moments. Unless we live in each moment, we are missing life. When we think about the past and worry about the future, we aren't living. We are remembering and projecting. That's not living. Life cannot be thought about. It has to be experienced. That's the only way life can ever mean anything. And experiencing can only happen in each moment, which means to live. There is never going to be any peace or happiness or quiet in the heart unless we learn to experience the moment. It will remain a struggle to do the things that one thinks one ought to do, to get to the place where one thinks one ought to go, to keep the things one believes are valuable. A constant struggle without ease or joy in it. Peace and happiness are not our birthright. They have to be attained with constant effort. And they can be attained if we recognize our enemies and learn to throw them out. Our inner household is our home where uninvited guests appear. Being hospitable, we let them all in. Then we find they have smashed the furniture, stolen the silver, and broken the windows. But instead of closing the door and not letting them in again, the next day they are right back. This is our inner household, besieged by enemies. They create havoc inside so that we lack peace and harmony and wonder why. We constantly try to find some external reason and say, it's because of that problem I have, or it's because of that relative I have, or it's because of that job I have. There's a long list of reasons. Everybody has a different list, but they all have one thing in common. None of them is real. All are imagined. It's because our internal household is not in order. Our external household can never run smoothly if our internal household doesn't do so. We reflect on the outside exactly what is inside. Restlessness and worry are not only useless, they are foolish. The Buddha said that we are acting foolishly because we don't see reality. But we have a good chance of changing that, haven't we? Restlessness and worry together are called distraction. We are distracted from what we really want to do, namely to meditate. But it doesn't only happen in meditation, it happens in everyday life also. We forget where we put the car keys. We forget what we were going to do because we're distracted, worrying about something. We don't get our work done easily and smoothly because the mind is somewhere else. The Buddha explained 5 different ways of getting rid of distracting thoughts. He gave very telling similes that help us to remember. The first and most gentle way he compared to a carpenter who has put a block of wood into a hole and finds it doesn't fit. He hammers it out again and puts a more fitting one in. This means substitution. If our mind keeps worrying about the future and remembering the past, it is not fitting. There's no happiness, no peace in that. Substitute. Put something in that fits much better. In meditation, put the meditation subject in. In daily living, put in what is wholesome and profitable. What is actually happening in that moment and has some joy and loving kindness in it. Substitute. The next simile he used was of a young man and a young woman dressed up very nicely, ready to go out. They get out to the street and realize that each of them has the carcass of a dead animal hanging around their necks. They quickly run back inside to clean themselves up because they are ashamed to be seen like that. We feel ashamed when our mind is so unruly. We feel ashamed when our mind has all these negativities in it. The Buddha said shame and fear are the guardians of the world. Without them, the world would be in an even worse state than it is. Most people think that dirt spots can only be seen on our clothing or on our body, but that's an illusion. The dirt spots on our mind are just as easily seen, not with the physical eye, but with the mental eye. We know when somebody is angry. They don't have to say a word. We know when somebody is egotistical. Their actions and their words betray them. Words and actions come from thought, and they must fall in line with what one is thinking. We often don't talk about what somebody has said, but rather what somebody has done, because that is an exact indication of what is going on in his or her mind, good or bad. Remember, the dirt spots on our mind are like a dead carcass hanging around our neck. We can take it off and only come outside when we are nice and clean again. Another simile the Buddha used to describe distracting thoughts was of seeing an acquaintance on the other side of the street. Instead of running over to greet him and inquiring about his health and family and getting involved with him, stay on your own side of the street and keep on walking. Pay no attention. When the distracting thought arises, don't become involved with it. This is more difficult. To pay no attention means that one is already somewhat in charge of one's mind. It's also a stronger mind action. The first 2 ways are gentler. To feel ashamed is possible for most people because one has a conscience. But to disregard a thought is more difficult and takes more strength. The next simile used was of a man running along who realizes he feels most uncomfortable and thinks, well, why am I running? I could be walking. So he starts walking. He's still uncomfortable, so he decides to stand still. He is still uncomfortable, so he decides to sit down. Still uncomfortable, he decides to lie down, and be really at ease. Recognize the discomfort that comes into the mind and into one's whole being when there are unprofitable, worried, restless, unskillful, and distracting thoughts. It brings no satisfaction, no joy, only the opposite. It keeps one anxious and uneasy. Know this discomfort and realize that nobody else in the world can make us comfortable except ourselves. Nobody can do it. Not the Buddha, nor his enlightened disciples, nor the Pali Canon, nor our parents, teachers, or friends. We have to do it ourselves. Unless we make our mind comfortable and joyful, it will never happen. These are 4 methods that we can use in succession, one after the other. If the first one doesn't work, then try the next one and the next one. If none of them has worked, then one must use suppression. The simile the Buddha used was that of a great big strong man who grabs a tiny puny man by the neck and drowns him, pushes him underwater, and keeps him underwater by force. In other words, we force those unwholesome thoughts out of the mind and force ourselves not to think of them. This is a last resort, but from it we can see that it's better to suppress than to continue thinking in unwholesome ways. Eventually, we can learn to substitute. With the suppression of unwholesome thoughts, we do not allow them to make a groove in the mind. We do not allow the mind to become habituated to that kind of thinking. A mind that is constantly thinking either in a restless, worried, or negative way, or an angry or self-indulgent way, finds it hard to drop the habit. Suppression is better in that case. One antidote the Buddha prescribed for restlessness and distracted thoughts is learning more about the Dhamma, the teaching. When one knows the teaching, one can direct the mind to it often. One remembers the Buddha's words. When one learns more about it, there are clear-cut and decisive answers in any kind of difficulty that arises. The Buddha's answers always lead out of suffering. They always lead out of egoism, but they are not so easy to follow. That's why people often don't wish to follow them, because they don't lead to self-indulgence and physical comfort. The other antidote is to associate with wise and mature people, in addition to having noble friends and noble conversation. This means that one should be careful what friends one chooses. It doesn't mean that one has to give up all one's old friends, but one must find such friends with whom a wise and uplifting conversation is possible. Again, we see that the people we associate with are very important. Birds of a feather flock together. The kind of people we're with is a direct indication of what we're interested in. Skeptical doubt. The last of our enemies is skeptical doubt. The Buddha compared it to traveling in the desert without provisions and without a map, thereby going around in circles, being overrun by bandits and killed. He gave the analogy of a pond covered with weeds. One can hardly see the water at all. Skeptical doubt is traditionally explained as doubting that the Buddha was really enlightened, that the Dhamma was the truth, and that the Sangha had perpetuated the Dhamma correctly. But more damaging for one's personal growth is doubt in one's own abilities, one's own spiritual aptitude. Self-confidence arises when one is able to do the things one sets out to do. In meditation, that means one is actually able to get into deep absorption. Self-confidence comes up in the second meditative absorption, when one knows that one can do what one wants to do with one's mind. One knows that one has become master of the mind to a certain extent. Self-confidence has many other facets. It's not aggressive, but is a feeling of certainty that we can rely on ourselves completely. That reliance only becomes possible when we have our emotions under control. We cannot be sure of ourselves when our emotions are untamed. When we get upset, angry, worried, fearful, envious, jealous, greedy, when all these things happen in our mind, there is no security to be found. We're not reliable, and of course we know that and have no self-confidence. Only when the emotions are brought under control and there is a feeling of rock-bottom security inside oneself, that no matter what happens, the reaction is going to be mild and equable, does one feel self-assured. Then one knows one has become a reliable person. This is an important aspect of doubt, because only when we feel confident within ourselves, about ourselves, will we feel confident enough to actually follow the spiritual path to its culmination. Taking one facet of it, trying it out, and then trying another one is much better than doing nothing, but it isn't the whole path. Self-confidence is essential to being able to say, I can really do this, and I will follow it until I come to the very end of it. Skeptical doubt arises in people who are unable to love. To commit ourselves to one ideal, to commit ourselves to one path, to commit ourselves to one spiritual activity, we have to be able to give ourselves wholly. If we cannot fully love, we cannot give ourselves fully. Where the spiritual path is concerned, we have to understand it and love it. Only then can we give ourselves to it wholeheartedly. If we do not give ourselves to the path with our whole being, it's as if one is married yet constantly thinking there might be some better marriage partner to be found. One can't have a very good marriage that way. We have to commit ourselves totally. Also, if we are married and don't understand the other person at all, yet we love them, there isn't going to be a great deal of communication and communion. If we understand the other one but don't love that person, the marriage is likewise a disaster. The spiritual path is the strongest commitment there is. There isn't any closer union than that, because it takes the whole person and doesn't even need anyone else for completion. We have to understand the path completely and love it from the bottom of our hearts. When we do that, there's no room for skeptical doubt. One doesn't have to ask, was the Buddha really enlightened? That's not a pertinent question. If we follow the path, we are going to find out for ourselves. Total commitment means we can give our whole being. If we can do that, it means we are able to love. People who have a great deal of skeptical doubt are always flitting from one thing to the other. In the West, we call them guru hoppers. That's a favorite pastime for so-called spiritual seekers who can't commit themselves. There might be a better one yet. A simile often used is this. You're looking for water on your farm, and you think you might find it in the southeast corner. You dig down 10 feet, and there's no water. Then you think, oh, must be the wrong spot. I'll go to the northwest corner. Then you go to the northwest corner and start digging. Again, after 10 feet, you give up and think, must be the wrong place. You do this 10 times and never find any water. But if you had stayed in the first place and dug 10 times 10 feet, you would certainly have found water. Just keep digging in one spot. Commit yourself fully. To commit ourselves fully to the path of the Buddha is a lifetime occupation. It doesn't mean that we can't keep a house or do many other things, but all of them need to be done with the Dhamma in mind. Then everything we do becomes a teaching and learning situation. The antidotes the Buddha presented for skeptical doubt are the same ones he used for restlessness and worry. Learning more about the Dhamma and associating with wise and mature people. The Buddha said the one who can get rid of these 5 hindrances is one who has finished the work, with nothing more to be done. These 5 hindrances are our passport to samsara, round of rebirth. They are our permanent residence visa. We have to do something about them if we want to get out. Even a slight improvement makes life much easier. And that's what everyone wants, isn't it? Ease. But the ease we want cannot be obtained through physical comfort. The ease we want can only be acquired through mental comfort, and these 5 enemies represent mental discomfort.